For many years, I lived without a clear dream, not because I didn't want one, but because I didn't know what a dream was supposed to feel like. Every morning, I woke up, followed my routine, and moved through my days on autopilot. From the outside, everything looked fine. I had a job, responsibilities, and a schedule. People around me spoke confidently about goals, plans, and ambitions. I listened and nodded, but inside, there was only silence. When someone asked me what I wanted to do in life, I smiled politely and gave safe answers. They sounded reasonable, but they hid the truth. I didn't feel lost. I felt empty in a quiet, persistent way, like walking without knowing why you're moving. I made choices that made sense to others, but none of them felt like mine. Slowly, I began to believe that living without a dream was normal. English, during those years, felt irrelevant. Not difficult, just distant. It existed in movies and other people's lives, but not in mine. I had learned it at school, but without purpose, it faded. Deep down, I knew something was missing, not language, but meaning. English felt like a mirror I avoided, because mirrors show what you try not to see. I wasn't unhappy, but I didn't feel enlivened. That numbness was the most dangerous part. That numbness settled in so quietly that I almost accepted it as peace. It didn't hurt enough to demand attention, and that made it easy to ignore. Days passed without resistance, and I mistook stability for fulfillment. I told myself that being comfortable was enough, that wanting more was unnecessary, even selfish. I learned how to function without asking difficult questions. I stayed busy, stayed reasonable, stayed within limits that felt safe. Over time, I stopped expecting anything different. The idea of a dream began to feel distant, almost unrealistic, as if it belonged to a version of life I was not living. There were moments when a quiet discomfort surfaced, usually at night, when the noise of the day faded. In those moments, I sensed that something essential was missing. But without words to describe it, I let the feeling pass. I returned to routine, unaware that this quiet avoidance was slowly shaping the direction of my life. That day did not begin with meaning. It felt like any other. I almost skipped it. There was a small request to help someone, nothing impressive. My first instinct was to say no, because I was busy, but because I was tired of things that led nowhere. Yet something inside me hesitated. I said yes without expectation. The place was ordinary. The people were ordinary. But there was presence. Children were there, talking and laughing freely, without fear of mistakes. They spoke because they wanted to express something, trusting that someone was listening. Watching them, something inside me softened. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about myself. I felt relief, the relief of not needing to know where I was going. That evening, I realized I hadn't been waiting for meaning. I had experienced it, quietly, in an ordinary moment I almost ignored. A question stayed with me. What if purpose is not something you find, but something you notice when you stop rushing? That question followed me home. Not loudly, not urgently, but quietly, like a presence walking beside me. I didn't try to answer it. I simply let it stay. That night, as I replayed the day in my mind, I realized how different it had felt from most days. There had been no pressure to perform, no expectation to achieve anything. I had shown up, and that had been enough. I thought about how often I rushed through life, always looking ahead, always waiting for something more meaningful to begin. I had believed that purpose would arrive as a clear direction, a strong desire, or a decisive moment. But that day had offered none of those. Instead, it had given me stillness. And within that stillness, something real had surfaced. In the days that followed, I became more aware of how I moved through my routine. I noticed how rarely I allowed myself to be fully present. My mind was usually elsewhere, planning, worrying, evaluating. That day had been different. I hadn't been trying to improve my life or figure out my future. I had simply been there. And in being there, I had felt lighter. I realized that the relief I felt wasn't about the children or the place itself. It was about the absence of pressure. For once, I wasn't measuring myself against an invisible standard. I wasn't asking if I was doing enough or becoming someone worth being. I was just responding to what was in front of me. That realization unsettled me. It suggested that the emptiness I had felt for so long wasn't caused by a lack of direction, but by constant resistance to the present moment. I had been waiting for meaning to arrive before allowing myself to engage. That day, meaning had appeared because I had engaged without waiting. I didn't suddenly feel inspired or motivated. There was no excitement pushing me forward. What I felt was quieter than that gentle curiosity, a willingness to pay attention. I began to wonder how many moments like this I had missed, simply because they didn't look important enough. That question changed how I saw my hesitation earlier that morning. Saying yes hadn't been an act of courage or generosity. It had been a moment of surrender, of letting go of my assumptions about what mattered. And in that small surrender, something had opened. I understood then that purpose might not announce itself with clarity or confidence. It might arrive disguised as an ordinary day, asking for nothing more than your presence. And if you rush past it, you may never notice it at all. After that day, my life didn't change dramatically, but something inside me had shifted. I went back, not with intention, but with curiosity. I stayed present. One afternoon, English appeared naturally in conversation. I answered simply, without preparing. No one reacted. The moment continued. English no longer asked me to become someone else. It invited me to stay. I realized I had been searching for a dream, when what I needed was presence. English became a bridge, not a requirement. Fear didn't disappear, but it lost its power. I stopped asking if I was good enough and started asking if I was present. That shift was subtle. I started noticing how much of my life I had lived slightly ahead of myself, always preparing, always evaluating, rarely arriving. Presence, I realized, was not something I practiced often. It was something I avoided because presence meant feeling, and feeling had always seemed complicated. As I returned more often, my role remained undefined. I wasn't there to teach, to lead, or to prove anything. I was there to listen, to respond, and sometimes simply to sit quietly. That simplicity felt unfamiliar at first. I kept waiting for a reason to justify my time, for a clear outcome that would make it worth it. But none came, and slowly I learned that none was needed. English continued to surface in the same gentle vein, ever announced, never planned. It appeared when it was useful and disappeared when it wasn't. I spoke without rehearsing. I listened without translating. There were moments when I hesitated, when old doubts returned, but they no longer controlled my decisions. I spoke anyway, not because I felt confident, but because the moment asked for a response. I noticed how different this felt from my past experiences with English. Before, the language had felt like a test, something that measured my worth, my intelligence, my readiness. Now, it felt neutral, human. It was simply one way of staying connected. No more important than a pause or a nod. That realization changed how I understood fear. Fear wasn't warning me that I was incapable. It was reminding me that I cared. And caring, I began to see, was not something to avoid. It was a sign that I was present. Instead of stepping back when fear appeared, I stayed. I allowed it to exist without letting it decide for me. Over time, I stopped waiting for confidence to arrive before participating. Participation itself became the source of confidence, not the loud kind, but a quiet steadiness, a trust that I could meet moments as they came. Without fully understanding them first, I began to understand that dreams don't always reveal themselves as destinations. Sometimes they show up as ways of being, ways that feel honest, connected, and alive. And in those moments, language doesn't lead the experience. Presence does. English, once distant and heavy, had become part of that presence. Not as something I chased, but as something that stayed with me when I chose to stay too. It took time to understand what had truly changed. From the outside, my life still looked the same. The same work, the same responsibilities, the same routines. Nothing dramatic had happened. And yet, inside, I felt alive in a way I hadn't before. Not excited, not certain. Just awake, I began to see that a dream isn't always a plan you can explain or a destination you can point to. Sometimes it's simply a feeling, a quiet sense of alignment, of being in the right place without forcing yourself to be anyone else. For years, I had been waiting for clarity before acting. Now, I understood that clarity comes after you move, not before. English didn't give me a new identity. It didn't turn me into someone more confident or more impressive. What it did was gentler than that. It created a space where my real self could surface. A space where I could speak, listen, hesitate, and continue without judgment. Through that space, I learned to trust myself, not because I was certain, but because I was present. I stopped asking, what should my dream be? I started asking, how do I feel when I am here? That question became my guide. When I felt engaged, curious, and quietly alive, I stayed. When I felt numb or disconnected, I paused and listened instead of pushing forward. Little by little, those moments of presence began to form a direction of their own. If you feel unsure or distant from your dream, know this: there is nothing wrong with you. You are not late. You are not lacking. Dreams don't always arrive as plans or goals. Sometimes they arrive as moments when you forget to perform. When time passes quietly, when you feel more yourself than usual. Pay attention to those moments. They are not random. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to have answers. You only need to be here. Being here does not mean having everything figured out. It means allowing yourself to participate in your own life without waiting for permission. It means trusting small signals instead of chasing grand certainty. Over time, those small moments begin to connect, forming a path that feels honest rather than impressive. You may not recognize it as a dream at first. It may feel too quiet, too simple. But if it brings you closer to yourself, if it helps you stay present instead of numb, then it matters. Growth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And when you learn to listen, that whisper can gently lead you forward.